Hi, this week is about theoretical approaches to consulting, so I wanted to talk about the systems approach. And in the systems approach, everything is connected to everything. If you make a change in one part of the organization, it inevitably will affect other parts of the organization. Now, the system approach avoids focusing on the symptom instead of the problem. And so I'd like to illustrate this and do it with a story that was published by McFarland and Bloomberg in 2006. And it's a good story for illustrating the systemic nature of things. As the story goes, there were managers in Washington, D.C. noticed that in their paperwork that the Jefferson Memorial seemed to be crumbling at a much quicker rate than the other memorials. And so out of concern, they asked their maintenance people, hey, why is the Jefferson Memorial crumbling at a faster rate? And so the answer they got was that it's crumbling at a quicker rate because they're washing it more often than the other monuments. Now, for a lot of organizations, that would have been the end of it. The managers would have said, hey, well, look, stop washing it so frequently and let's wash it on the same schedule as everything else. But instead, in this case, the managers used a systems approach. And they asked the question, so they said, why is it that we are washing the Jefferson Memorial more often than the other memorials? And so when they asked that question, the answer came back, well, the maintenance crew said that's because of excessive bird droppings in the Jefferson Memorial. Now, once again, it could have ended there, and they could have said, okay, let's get some type of exterminator for birds, or that can shoo birds away. And but instead, the managers using the systems approach asked the question why again. So they said, why are there more bird droppings in the Jefferson Memorial than compared to others? And they said, the manager says, well, that's because they're in there feeding on the large population of spiders that are in the Jefferson Memorial. So once again, that would have been the end for many organizations. They would have called for someone to get rid of the spiders. But instead, these managers asked the question, so they said, why is it we have more spiders in the Jefferson Memorial than the other memorials? And the maintenance crew said, well, it seems that the spiders were feeding on an abundance of midges, which is a type of small water insect, because it was near the water there. And in the memorial. And so, once again, it could have ended there. But the manager said, okay, why are there more midges in the Jefferson Memorial? And the maintenance crew said, well, the lights in the Jefferson Memorial work on an automatic switch, and they come on before dusk, just before dusk. And the midges are attracted to the light, so being just before dusk, they flock to the Jefferson Memorial. So having heard this and learned that, there was a simple solution here, and the solution was program the automatic lights to come on after dusk. So wait till it gets dark, then, because by then the midges have settled in for the night. They can turn on the lights in the memorial without attracting all the midges, and the spider population goes down, the birds go down, they can get back to washing the memorial the same as the others, and it avoids any extravagant costs in preserving the memorial. So this is a really good example of how everything is connected to everything, and it was systemic in nature. Now, it can work the other way as well. Sometimes an action is taken with a positive intention, but without thinking through the implications on the system, and then this results in unintended consequences. Now, our government is notorious for doing this, and the problem is that they're smart people. They know they have created an unintended consequence, but they don't take the time to go back and make a correction. So usually we're stuck living with the unintended consequence. So in this next story, it's about President Clinton. And matter of fact, President Clinton even told part of the story in an interview on C-SPAN. He said he'd actually had campaigned during his campaign for presidency. He talked about the soaring compensation for CEOs relative to American workers, and where CEO compensation was increasing at a much faster rate than worker compensation. And so one of his campaign pledges was to stop that. So when he was elected in 1993, there was a congressional act with a positive intention to balance that increase in wage compensation. And they did it by limiting CEO compensation to $1 million in income for purpose of taxes. So this was done as an incentive to organizations to scale it back. And so once again, it was a positive intention due to these exponential increases, and he was fulfilling a campaign promise. Now, the problem was, and Chang, who is an economist at the University of Cambridge, and he really, he doesn't have a political axe to grind, so he's just describing it historically. He called this the Holy Grail or an unholy alliance in terms of what happened. And what happened was, in reference to shareholder value maximization, organizations argued CEO compensation based upon their ability to compensate shareholders. And what they started doing, they started paying them with stock increases. So this involved increasing shareholder value, and they did it by ruthlessly cutting costs. And in many, not all cases, but in many cases, they exploited other stakeholders such as employees and communities. Now, how'd they do this? Well, employees were exploited through downsizing and job enlargement. So employees ended up with more things to do, same amount of pay. And communities through social organization and corporate social responsibility was decreased. Now, one of the people leading the way on this was Jack Welch. And there was, during the 1950s through the 70s, the average shareholder value in the U.S. was between 35 and 45%. And then by 2010, when Chang wrote his book, it was at 60%. And it was due to this practice of exploiting other stakeholders. And Jack Welch at GE was one of the leaders. As a matter of fact, when he retired, his compensation package was so lucrative that there was public outrage about it. And it included private jets and vacations and millions of dollars. And what he did is he actually set a precedent for other CEOs to have to follow to get to this 60% mark in order to compete in the stock market. And so workers, even to this day in 2017, are still experiencing downsizing and job enlargement, and this is what caused it all. So it was 25 years of exploitation due to an unintended consequence to something that was intended to be a positive change. Both of these are good examples that illustrate the power of systems. It is simply everything is connected to everything. And if change is made in one part of the system, it's going to affect another. Now, Virginia Satir, the late Virginia Satir, she died in the late 80s. She used, in therapy, she used to describe a technique she called having a parts party. And it was when she had a client who had different parts within them in conflict. In other words, a part of me feels this way, and another part of me feels another way. She would say, well, we need to have a parts party and get all these parts together and get them going the same way. So that was her way of describing how to integrate the client. And so sometimes as consultants, we don't know what to do. And it's kind of like the analogy with Satir's parts party. And so what I'd like to do here is talk a little bit about a time when I did a parts party. And this story here, a plant, it was a manufacturing component plant, and it had been closed, and then it had been reopened following a negotiation. In other words, between union and management, they agreed to reopen the plant. I was sent in following the reopening to help optimize performance in some of the areas where performance was not competitive. And so things were going well. I mean, I had good worker cooperation. People were trying to achieve performance goals, and skilled trades kept complaining that they couldn't get parts, and this was causing excessive downtime in manufacturing. So manufacturing was complaining, how everything is connected. So I went to the crib and was talking to the manager of the crib, and this manager of the crib, he seemed, straight up, straightforward guy, and he said, "Hey, I'm doing everything the way I'm supposed to do it." He says, "I'm not trying to save budget or money or anything like that." He says, "I'm just trying to do the job the way it was set up to be run." And I believed him. I thought he was being authentic. And so skilled trades people and the managers in manufacturing and maintenance were all getting frustrated, and they were starting to fight and finger point. And I was hearing complaints from all parties. Even the union representatives were complaining. So what I did was I decided to set up a parts party. And I invited one skilled trades person from each trade to a meeting. I invited their union representative, their maintenance manager, the manufacturing managers in the areas that they service, the crib manager and the plant manager. I got them all in a room. And I had no idea what the answer was. I knew what the complaints were. So I looked at the skilled trades guys and I said, "Hey, look, guys, tell your story. Tell everyone here what you've been telling me here for the last few weeks." And so the skilled trades, they were being very good. They were being very honest and authentic, and they were explaining, they go to the crib to get parts and they can't get them. They're always out. And, we went on for about a half hour with basically sounded like everybody was venting. And no one there had an attitude, in the sense that they were all being honest. And suddenly the plant manager goes, "Aha," he says, "I have it." And he had a smile on his face. He says, "I understand." So we all looked at him, in amazement, said, "What?" He says, "Well," he says, "when this plant was closed," he said, "the division, which is not located in this city, they automatically set everything in the crib to 0. It was either 0 or 1, maybe it was 1. And he said that was an automatic part of closing. He said when we reopened, nothing was reset. So he said all the reorder points that we had established, they were gone. They were wiped out in the plant closing." And so what he did, he looked at the crib, the manager of the crib, and he says, "Look," he says, "order all the parts these skilled trades people want." And he told them, he says, "You make a list, give it to him, he's going to get them all immediately." And then he asked him, he says, "I'd like to, get a committee to work together to get the right reorder point set on these parts." He said, "The skilled trades guys will know." He told the crib manager, "Get your people to work with him. Let's get this redone." Which they did, and it was all done in a positive way, and it fixed the problem. So having the secret to success in the parts party was having all of the interdependent parts in the room at the same time as we worked through the problem. And that was, as a consultant, I had faith that if I got all of the interdependent parts in a room, knowing that they cared a great deal, that they would figure it out, because all the parts were present. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I'd like to kind of wrap this up with the late Russell Ackoff, who was really known as one of the greatest system thinkers that we've had. And he had 4 simple questions for a mess. And by the way, he always complained about the English language, saying, we don't have a word in English to describe a system full of problems, so he coined the word mess. He said, if an organization is a mess, what he meant was it's a system full of problems. And so here were his 4 questions. What exactly is the mess? So, for example, the mess in my last story would have been downtime is excessive, manufacturing can't make their quota, skilled trades can't get the parts to get the machines running timely. Maintenance, manufacturing are fighting with each other. They're all blaming the crib as well. That's the mess. There's a system full of problems. And then what were the underlying causes and how were they interrelated? Well, the underlying causes were they couldn't get parts in a timely way, and so downtime was excessive, and so the crib, maintenance, and manufacturing were all interdependent. And what would happen if no significant changes were made to the system? They'd go out of business because they weren't making their quotas. And they'd already been closed once, so this would have really been critical. So what that would have said, that last question would have said, hey, the sense of urgency here is high. Let's figure this out and take action. So Acuff's 4 questions are pretty good at cutting through a mess in a system. And so anyway, the systems approach is a pretty good approach for consulting, and it's one that I like to use. And I wanted to talk about this week. Thanks.